In the Sahara Desert, Tuareg rebels pose for a picture with two flags. One, the nation of Azawad, an unrecognized Berber state in northern Mali. The second is the Ukrainian flag. Hours earlier, the Azawad rebels launched a devastating ambush against a combined Russian-Malian force. Limping back to base, the Wagner military column was attacked a second time by Islamist rebels. At least 100 Russian mercenaries were ended or captured, Wagner's worst defeat in Africa ever. As news hit the headlines, the Ukrainian government claimed to have given the rebels intel on Russian movements, and then the flag picture was shared. It was a massive propaganda boost for Ukraine, but it was also the culmination of a long-term strategy. Before getting involved in Mali, Ukrainian special forces began operations in nearby Sudan. Now, Russia and her African allies may be nervously wondering about Ukrainian interference in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Central African Republic. But why has the Russia-Ukraine conflict spilled over into Africa, and what does it mean for stability on the continent? Africa has been involved in the Russia-Ukraine war from its outset. Do you remember media headlines saying the conflict would lead to starvation in Africa? The World Food Programme desperately needed grain from Russia and Ukraine for famine relief. Well, things turned out to be a bit more complex. Only 10% of grain went to sub-Saharan Africa before the war. In 2024, it had dropped to 3%. The grain gap has been filled by Russia, whose wheat production has increased despite the conflict. Now, free grain delivery to Zimbabwe and Burkina Faso is part of Russia's soft power initiative. This has helped Russia in the United Nations, where African countries receiving Russian grain have abstained or voted against condemning the invasion of Ukraine. When a grain corridor was opened in Ukraine, 90% of exports remained in Europe, lowering wheat prices in Poland and angering local farmers. The war has had a big impact on food production, but it has not led to a global shortage. It's enabled Russia to dominate the African grain market. A Russian official would describe it as his country's silent weapon. Russia's big wins in Africa haven't escaped the notice of Ukraine and its allies. Although Zelensky has found himself on the back foot, he has quietly begun his own counter-offensive. Things were tame to start out with. Ukraine bought ammunition from Sudan to use against Russia. The Sudanese government tread a fine line. At the same time they were selling guns to Ukraine, Wagner was transporting Sudanese gold across the desert in pickup trucks to Central African Republic. But since the outbreak of Sudan's civil war in 2023, the situation has shifted again. Ukraine has stepped up its presence in Sudan. Ukrainian special forces have been filmed fighting with government forces against the rebels. Their night vision and tactical experience made them a deadly foe. They also bought explosive drones from the Russian front. Now they were swooping down to explode on rebel Toyotas. Videos of the operations were released to the Western press. There was a big propaganda element to Ukraine's actions in Sudan. It's doubtful a few drones and spec hops could turn the tide in a war being fought by tens of thousands, but it was also not a big issue for Russia. Since the war, Wagner's involvement in Sudan has decreased. In June 2024, Putin shifted his support away from the rebels to the government, agreeing a deal to sell weapons to Sudan in exchange for a port on the Red Sea. If Ukraine wanted to fight Russia in Africa, it had picked the wrong country. Putin and Zelensky had ended up on the same side. Since a military coup in 2021, Mali's leader Assimi Goïta has turned away from the West and towards Russia. The French military have withdrawn and Wagner have arrived. Despite Western accusations of brutality, Wagner has been something of a success in Mali. In the south and centre of the country, they have brought most territory back under government control. In the north, progress has been slower. For decades, Tuareg Azawad separatists and Islamist groups have fought to control these desert regions. In 2024, Wagner and Malian forces started a grueling campaign to secure control of the major northern settlements. By June, they had succeeded. Most cities and large towns were government-controlled. But the Russian mercenaries and African soldiers quickly became victims of their own success. The Islamists and Tuareg Azawad formed an alliance against their new common enemy. In July, Wagner and the Malian army began a fated march to capture the last town under rebel control, Tinzaouaten, on the Algerian border. On the 23rd, a column of 12 vehicles arrived in Bugessa, about 50 kilometers from Tinzaouaten. The group met no resistance, but saw signs that the Tuareg Azawad were mobilizing. They relayed a call for help and advanced cautiously along the desert road. Suddenly, one of the trucks exploded, injuring a Malian soldier. The road to Tinzaouaten had been mined. Halfway along the route, a desert storm hit the column, lowering visibility and putting drone and helicopter support out of action. Then, the Azawad fighters attacked. Gradually, the Malian and Russian soldiers found themselves being pushed towards a narrow gorge, a certain death trap. But they were able to fight their way out of the situation and establish a temporary base 7 kilometers from Tinzaouaten. During the night, the sandstorm howled across the desert and both sides regrouped. The next day, clear skies brought Russian drones and helicopters into the attack. A Mi-24 was seriously damaged by rebel fire and limped away from the battle before crashing in government-controlled territory. Gradually, the military column realized it was fighting a combined rebel force of Islamist and Tuareg Azawad rebels. The decision was made for the entire column to withdraw to the safety of Kidal, about 150 kilometers south, but the retreat soon turned into a rout. Reinforcements sent to support the retreating soldiers walked straight into an ambush. Islamists and Azawad rebels attacked from both sides at once, overwhelming the Russian Malian soldiers, ending many, capturing many more, and destroying 7 vehicles. Reportedly, amongst the dead was a prominent Russian blogger with a Telegram channel of over 500,000 followers. Wagner had been overwhelmed, sucked into a trap, ambushed, and destroyed. In ones and twos, survivors limped back to Kidal. Captured soldiers were quickly exchanged. At least 50 Russian mercenaries were dead. Desert warfare is unpredictable, but the firepower and tactics used by the rebels took Wagner and the Malian forces completely by surprise. The difference, according to Ukrainian sources, was Ukraine. A spokesman for Ukraine's intelligence services said they had supported the rebel attack with information on Russian movements. A Russian mercenary trainer went further, accusing France, America, and Ukraine. Coordination of the militants was taken over by Western forces. Tensions over grain sales and votes in the UN grew into jostling in the Sudan. But now, in Mali, it has developed into a proxy war. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is expanding, not because Ukraine is winning, but because it is beginning to cautiously eye an end to the war. If Ukraine does eventually go to negotiate, it will be looking to put itself in as strong a position as possible. Threatening the stability of Russia's allies in Africa is a useful bargaining chip. For the Sahelian states, Ukraine has established itself as an enemy to their campaign to stabilize historically lawless regions. Funding rebel militias is a dangerous game. As the Americans discovered in Afghanistan, today's anti-Russian freedom fighter may become tomorrow's enemy number 1. If you enjoyed this video and would like more content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Africa Review. And if you'd like to read this video as an article, you can find a longer version of it on Substack.